Hello, Lawrence LeBrocq, managing partner of Garces, Grabler, and LeBrocq. Here with the podcast, Victim to Victory, Triumph Over Tragedy. Today we have the privilege of having Sandra Fava with us. She is a family law practitioner up in Morristown, New Jersey. Welcome to the show, Sandra.
Hi there, Lawrence. Thanks for having me.
No, it's good to have you on the show, Sandra. So tell me a little bit about, we have such a rough profession. It is requires so much time. How do you balance being a mom, raising a family, and still practicing law successfully?
Well, I don't know that there ever really exists a true balance. I think that we're always shifting things around to get to the best or closest balance that we can possibly have. I think that if I'm being completely honest, which I'm very comfortable being, there are days when I think I've really blown it all up, and then there are other days where I think that I'm killing it and I'm skipping down the street. I think that, I am fortunate that I have a good support system. My husband, who is also an attorney, does help me or help with raising our kids so he's not an absent, kind of you figure it out. And then between good friends and family, they assist in doing things. My kids are of varying ages, so they sometimes struggle, particularly my younger ones, with, if I'm not there or around for what they've seen to them probably feels like forever. But, it's not always about the quantity of time, but the quality of time you spend with them. And so I try to be very present when I am with them. I let clients know very early on, like initial consultation, that they are very difficult to get a hold of me between the hours of like 5 and 8 or 9 p.m., 6 or 9 p.m., because I do go home and, have dinner with them and we have activities and we do homework and all the things that any other family would do. And if they have an emergency during those hours, there's not much I can do anyway, and they need to call the police, right? So I think managing the expectation from clients early on is important. I've never had a client say to me, "Oh, no, I can't work with you because of that." They all have been very receptive and understanding. So and again, I think with the kids, it's just really about having that quality, sometimes over the quantity of time with them.
No, I think that's great. I have a family of three children, so I understand that work life balance is sometimes a little challenging. So, have the kids taught you anything about resilience and self worth that you've been able to bring to the practice of law?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think for many parents, as we watch our kids grow up and go through different phases, you see things that they do and their reactions, and you think, I wish I could be like that. And sometimes you can kind of channel that. A great example is my middle child is a boy. He's turning 10 in 2 days,
Happy
and
birthday.
he's really like a free spirit. That's the best way I can describe him. Ever since he was like almost right out of the womb, kind of beat to his own drum, kind of never worried about what anybody else ever thought about him. And there were moments, as kids get older into school that they were, maybe I was worried or we were worried that he might be, mocked because of some of his behavior or, not going along with the norm. And he's always just like, this is who I am. He owns it fully. He's really very, happy-go-lucky all the time. He doesn't let things get him down. And I try to think of him when I have situations where I'm, like not feeling as confident maybe or something, kind of what he would do in that
Right.
particular instance.
And is that your middle child?
Yeah, my middle one.
My middle one's the same way, free spirit.
Yeah, I heard that from a lot of parents with middle kids. Funny that you say that.
And then you had a horrific diagnosis with breast cancer. When did that occur?
That was actually right during COVID. So it was in September of 2020 that I received my diagnosis, and I did a full year, probably a bit longer, of extensive treatment.
And how did that change your life perspective after having cancer? How did that affect your life and your career?
So, certainly with regard to my life, I have always been a very driven person. I think that comes from having immigrant parents and kind of knowing the value of hard work from their example. Regarding my career, I've always been a really hard worker. And in fact, I think that during that period, like leading right up to my diagnosis, probably for a year or two before that, I was really intense in my job, meaning, I worked a lot more than I probably should have in retrospect. I fully believe that part of the aggressiveness of my diagnosis had a tremendous effect on the stress levels that I was having at that time. And I manage stress pretty well, actually. I probably would tell you that I do better when I'm under stress or under pressure. But it does, obviously, we all know that it affects our health and well-being. So one of the things that I realize is that clients will be there, clients will come and go, the law will be there, but my health and my well-being is really fragile for all of us. It's not just because of a cancer diagnosis. And so I started to reprioritize kind of the things in my life, making a lot, making sure that priorities included, taking care of myself, being active, eating well, not kind of flying by on 3 hours of sleep a night because, you're working till 2, 3 in the morning or whatnot. And then certainly the same thing with my family, kind of realizing that or really understanding that my kids were only going to be this age for this short period of time. And I had to kind of make sure that again, quality over the quantity, becoming like when I was with them, that I was really focused and, making sure that I could be present, volunteering for things, the things that I could do that would matter to them in their lives, given their different ages and stages. And that really kind of has stayed with me for over the last 5 years. It's something that I continue to do. And I feel that I am a better parent, partner, a better lawyer, boss, manager, because of all of those things, because I have come to realize that. And, as younger lawyers or the workforce has shifted into this, hybrid working or working remotely, I think that I've have a better understanding of what is valuable to people, what motivates them, because it's kind of in tune with what now motivates me as well.
Right. So, was there something that helped you get through this diagnosis? I mean, it was over a year of treatment for you, and you're always battling that memory. So, was there anything that helped you get through that?
Well, I would say definitely I had a great support system, which I think everybody needs. I was part of a support group, and my family for sure. My good friends would do all sorts of stuff. My kids were really wonderful. I don't know that my youngest fully understood, but definitely my oldest did. And they would spend a lot of time with me, kind of watching movies or trying to make me laugh, putting on little shows and things like that. And I really had a tremendous team of doctors, and they would not let me give up. If I came in and I was unhappy, then they would, kind of whip me into shape really quick. Some of it was tough love, some of it was, not so tough love, but and I was never going to give up anyway because I have my kids, and it's so important to me that I'm there. They're the most important thing in my life by far. So it's hard, right? But a lot of it has to do with your mental space and what kind of rent you give to some of that negativity. You can lay around and cry certainly on any day of the week about a number of things, but if you try to stay positive and focused on the future, I think it really helped me. And I had this career, and I had goals that I wanted to achieve, and I kind of stayed focused on those things.
So, going back, what inspires you to pursue a career in law and become a lawyer?
So, as I mentioned, I'm a first generation American here. My parents came from Italy. I am the youngest of three siblings, but I was a whoops baby, to put it nicely. And my parents didn't really have an education in the way that, typical Americans do. There was neither of them really went to college, not, sorry, high school, let alone college and an advanced degree. But they really valued education. And so our job was really to go to school and do well in school. And particularly with me, my brother and sister, my older siblings, they had different interests and abilities. But particularly with me, starting around, honestly, like 6 years old, I became very enamored with, I don't know if you remember the People's Court and Judge Wapner,
Sure.
because I think, yeah, well, many younger people don't know what I'm talking about. But that really was like one of my favorite television shows. So much so that if I misbehaved, one of the threats was that I wasn't going to be allowed to watch.
Oh, that's funny.
And, I thought, oh, I kind of as a young kid, like, I want to be a lawyer. I would start saying things like that, like, that's going to be me one day. And then, kind of my parents really nurtured like that idea, kind of were like, that's what you're going to do, you're support that. And then in high school, Ally McBeal was really a big show. And I thought, oh, how cool, I can speak a couple of languages. I'm going to do, international corporate law. My dad had a business. I kind of knew my way a bit around a small business. And I got to law school and I wasn't going to do family law. I have a family member who went through, the only one in our family who went through a really difficult divorce and family law proceeding. It took many years and a lot of money and bankruptcy and a lot of heartbreak. So I wasn't going to do that, is what I told myself. But, I kind of fell into it. In the summer in between my first and second year of law school, I was working at a mid-sized New Jersey firm. They didn't do family law, but the partner that was supervising me got assigned a pro bono domestic violence case and asked me to work on it. And so I kind of got, very familiar with this victim and her story and wanted to see it through and wanted it to be successful because of that emotional connection. That transpired into taking a couple of classes, doing well, professors saying, reaching out and saying that they thought I should maybe do the clinic. My law school had a clinic for credit where you could be under the supervision of a professor or attorney and appear in court and actually have some hands-on experience. So I did the family law clinic. I worked on some pretty interesting cases there. And then I worked at a small firm. I got some advice from somebody my parents knew who was a very successful attorney and kind of said to me, you should be exploring different practice areas before you settle in on one. And I had the opportunity to do that at different places and kind of just circling back always to the family law practice and seemingly, having a knack for that. So even though I said I would never do it, it just seemed like the stars were aligned for me to do that. And so that's where I was. I ended up right out of law school clerking for a Superior Court judge who was the presiding judge of the family part in the county where I reside. And then I went to a small firm, and then, not even a year there, I was brought to a national law firm where I spent probably 17 of my 20-year career. I had a small 3-year stint where I went to a very well-known New Jersey law firm, not a national law firm, and I ran their department for a couple of years, but then was lured back to my prior firm, which I don't regret. I think that, all of those experiences helped shape me to the attorney that I am today, for sure.
So after 17 years with a big law firm, a top 100 law firm, what made you finally decide to go out on your own?
So I think a little bit of that was the breast cancer journey. I think a little bit of that was age. It's still very much, in my experience in the practice of law, a very male-dominated profession. And despite, meeting certain markers or having certain numbers, because, it is at the end of the day, it's a business, right? And they're looking at your profitability like anything else. And, meeting all of those markers, exceeding some of them, particularly in my practice area, I still felt like because I wasn't a man, that I wasn't in the boys club. And so that kind of seeped into some of like the little things, and the little things you can deal with, but then that piled up into a lot of other things. And the firm kept growing and it started to feel like more corporate than it was when I had first joined, the 17 years prior. And I just was not really happy anymore being there, like at all. And really, it was my husband who said, like, why don't you just do this on your own? You know what you're doing. You have support. You have, a reputation that's, well regarded. And I first told him he was nuts. I said, no way. I can't do that. And then I did it because I just had to do something. And, worst case scenario, if it didn't work out, I'd find someplace else to go. But here we are almost 9 months in, and for the first few months, I'd vary between, feeling so excited that doing this to, almost crying and saying, like, what have I done? I would tell you that those days are very few and far between, and I think that this was a great career step for me. I'm really happy to have my own firm. I am creating a culture that I am very proud of and still producing high quality, legal work for clients for sure. I don't I didn't change, who I work with or the type of work that I do just because I'm not at this, bigger name. All of that translates and comes with you. You don't forget how to be a lawyer just because you go to a different place. But it's nice to do it with people who that you know and like and you can trust, really working as a team, everybody, being happy to be here, at least from what I can tell. It's nice.
So, how is Fava Law different than your traditional huge law firm?
So, that's a harder question for me to answer because I feel like the way that I ran my practice, my clients, while I was at a very large law firm hasn't really changed much, except I don't have to answer sort of to the powers that be about some of the things that don't really matter to what service or outcomes you get for your clients, right? So I've always kind of been very true to who I am. I don't sell clients anything. I would never tell somebody that I could get them any things in the sky that are never going to exist. That's not who I am, certainly. I think that I'm able to create a more personal level of service because I am crafting the team that works with me. I am training them to handle cases in the way that if it were my family member, I would want somebody to be working with them in that level. And at the same time, giving, my team the boundaries for some level of work-life balance. There are various practice areas where that's really difficult to achieve. I've only been a family law practitioner, and I can tell you that I think family law is really hard, especially in this day where communication is everywhere. It's so easily accessible. And I think sometimes people forget, that yes, they're paying you and you're their lawyer, but you also have like a wedding on the weekend and you have your kid's graduation or you have a sport event, at 4 o'clock, or you have a sick kid at home and you have to go to that. And I didn't necessarily have that support in a large firm because larger firms, law firms, they tend to create a lot more competition. Whether, law schools can somewhat be like that, at least when I was there
Sure.
20 years ago.
Yep.
And I think, lawyers by nature, given their type A personalities by and large, and kind of what the goals are for your compensation, it lends people to feel that way. And if they're not meeting whatever their criteria is, maybe it makes them feel better to cut down other people. So none of that exists here. I don't do that, and I really want to put my clients first, and make sure that they're getting the service that they need and the quality of work that they've always known that I can give them.
What advice would you give another female lawyer who thinks or feels as if she's trapped in the old boys network?
Yeah, I've been asked that a lot lately, and it's difficult because if you know me well, you know I'm somebody who really can't. I have a very low tolerance for this network, right? And I really want, even before I had a daughter, never just seemed right to me. If you're here doing the same thing as a contemporary and just because of your gender, you're not being treated the same, you should say something. But as you grow up, those ideals in the real world, it's really hard to put them into practice. And so I think my best advice to somebody who is feeling that like that in the legal profession, another female who's feeling that, is look at what you can change for yourself, right? And kind of really give yourself a cold hard assessment, right? Is it something that you've done or not done? Is it really your firm's culture? Talk to other women, look around at the rooms where decisions are being made, the committees. What do those look like in your organization? Because, maybe other people aren't stepping up and maybe it's just a matter of asking and being there, at the right time. Maybe you aren't meeting certain metrics that, the firm values very highly in order to get yourself in the room where the decisions are being made. It's not so black and white, but I always felt that my best bet was on myself because I knew what I could do and what I couldn't do. I think that I'm very tempered, is maybe the word, and realistic about who I am and what I can do. I know what I don't know. And if I don't know it, I know that I got to ask a question, call up a friend, all of those things. So, but I always knew that if I'm going to work really hard to do whatever I need to do personally, professionally, for a friend, for a client, it kind of doesn't matter. That's my personality. And so if you can bet on yourself, that's your safe bet. And you can forge your own path. We all want to kind of change the system in many different regards, but it's not always the easiest path to do, as we have seen through history.
So you've talked about culture a little bit and you've touched on it. What kind of culture do you want to create at Fava Law?
Yeah, I want everybody to kind of have a voice here in the sense that, I don't want Autobots. I don't want people coming in and telling me what I want to hear. I want people to be inspired to think creatively, to think outside the box, to be solution oriented for our clients. I think that that's one of the value adds that I bring to this practice area is, I'm not the type of attorney who says, well, I did this in three other cases, 10 other cases, and it worked well for those clients, so we're going to do the same thing for you. I'm listening to people's stories. I want to know how I can help them specifically, their family, what their goals are, whether the goals are realistic, and how we can think about ways to help them reach their goals. And I want the people that are with me to do the same thing. I want them to not be afraid to ask a question. I want them to want to grow and learn, to kind of step outside of their comfort zone and to grow and move forward in their professional lives. And so that's what we do. We're, supportive of that, even when it comes to support staff, non-attorneys, just giving people the opportunity to think for themselves, come up with something, whether it's a solution or a better plan. The door's open. I do a lot of mentoring. I always have at my various firms, mentoring and training. So it's a natural fit for me. And honestly, I really enjoy that. Some days I would say I'd rather be mentoring than actually practicing the law, but can't always do that. And it's rewarding, if you bring on a team and they're growing and, they're being successful, I think it's a reflection on the organization's leadership, whoever or however many of that there may be.
Well, how have you changed as a person from the start of law school and going through law school and now practicing for over 20 years in family law? And then take us to where do you want to be when you finish your career? So take us on that journey of how you've changed and how you want to change.
Yeah, for sure. So I think as a younger lawyer, I generally felt like I had something to prove. So maybe I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, I could probably say to that. I felt like because my parents were immigrants, because I didn't come from a family of lawyers, you go into large organizations, large law firms, us first generation lawyers, particularly in New Jersey, where I'm from, at the time that I was practicing, we were really very nominal part of the community. I would talk to other people, even of my same class here, and, many of them, if, had family members, some way, shape, or form who had, in the profession and had given them some mentorship. And I didn't really have any of that. So I think that I always felt like, and being a young woman, I felt like I had to make sure that people took me seriously and that I knew, what I had to do. And if I had to push a little bit, then I would push a little bit to make sure that people took me seriously and saw that I was capable. I think with time, that kind of softened a bit. I think life shapes who you are professionally, right? So I always was an advocate for children. Even before I had children, I certainly had a maternal, if you want to call it, instinct. I think having kids and actually seeing how difficult it is to raise children, and having that firsthand experience has definitely amplified that understanding, that part of this nuanced part of this area of the law, so to speak, and how fragile these relationships can be and how subjective all of this is. I don't know about the future. I'd like to keep doing this. My kids are certainly really proud of what I do. I think that that kind of makes me smile. Long term, I'm not sure. I think right now I've got the goal of adding complementary practice areas. I'm not necessarily talking about becoming a big firm, but I do have a lot of, there's a lot of complementary practice areas in what I do. For example, trust and estate planning. In my prior firm, I did a lot of work with the T&E department, as we called them. So that's certainly one of them. I have recently a retired New Jersey appellate division judge joined our firm. He started in the Superior Court in family, moved to civil, left the Superior Court as the presiding judge in criminal, and went up to the New Jersey Appellate Division for several years, and now is of counsel with us. He's always been a tremendous mentor, and has a great perspective. So I try to resolve cases in every way. I am a litigator, by nature of the practice, but I am also a mediator. I've been to mediation. I've been in arbitration with cases. He has that alternative dispute resolution hat for sure, and is a good resource, again, of this whole mantra of we're thinking, how can we help people, not just the traditional ways.
Right. So if somebody wants to find you, Sandra, how do they find Fava Law?
Sure. Well, obviously, we have a website of favalawNJ.com. I have several social media accounts, so you can find us on Fava Law LLC on Instagram. There's a Facebook page, Sandra Fava. We have LinkedIn pages. We have our own podcast. I've been on several other podcasts. We put out a monthly blog. So there's a lot of information out there about things that we've done, that we do, and ways to find us.
And you're in what part of New Jersey?
Morristown, New Jersey.
All right. Well, Sandra, thank you so much for being on the show, and I wish you great success and great luck with your new law firm and helping individuals who need a family law attorney or a trusted or estate plan.
Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great day.